Anaya's wedding was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life, but just 7 days later, her husband Rohan turned their dream honeymoon into a chilling nightmare that ended in cold-blooded murder. The wedding day was one of the brightest moments in Anaya's life. She had waited for years to be recognized not just for who she was, but for the love she carried in her heart. The venue was beautifully decorated with flowers, glowing lights, and music that lifted everyone's spirits. Guests admired the couple as they walked hand in hand, smiling and dressed in their finest. Anaya looked radiant in her bridal attire, her eyes filled with dreams of a future she thought was secure. Rohan stood tall beside her, playing the role of a proud and devoted husband. Photographs captured their laughter, the gentle way they exchanged rings, and the emotional vows that left many wiping tears from their eyes. For outsiders, it was a love story that defied challenges and promised happiness. Behind Anaya's glowing smile, there was a sense of relief. She had overcome judgment and prejudice to stand at that altar. Her journey had not been easy, facing whispers in the streets, rejection from relatives, and constant battles to prove her worth as a human being deserving of love. Yet here she was, embraced by a husband who had once promised her that none of those struggles mattered. For her, this marriage was more than a union. It was proof that she had carved her own place in the world, and now she could live like any other bride, celebrated, admired, and loved. The celebrations stretched long into the night. Guests danced, music played, and every table was filled with laughter. The newlyweds received gifts wrapped in bright paper, blessings from elders, and good wishes whispered into their ears. Everyone believed they were witnessing the start of something rare and beautiful. Even the local community, often divided in their views, came together to honor the couple. For once, the spotlight was not on gossip or controversy, but on the beauty of a wedding that seemed to symbolize progress and acceptance. Soon after the festivities ended, Anaya and Rohan prepared for the next chapter of their lives. They packed their bags for a honeymoon at a coastal resort that was famous for its luxury and charm. Anaya was thrilled to finally experience the kind of romantic getaway she had only dreamed about. The thought of walking barefoot along the shore, sharing quiet dinners by candlelight, and making memories far from the judgmental eyes of society filled her with excitement. She believed it was the beginning of her fairy tale, one that many said she would never have. When they arrived at the resort, the atmosphere seemed perfect. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, waves glimmering under the sun. Their villa overlooked the sea, and every corner of the place seemed designed for love. Hotel staff recalled seeing them exploring the grounds together, taking photos with genuine smiles, and holding hands as if nothing could break them apart. Guests noticed them too, commenting on how radiant the bride looked and how charming the husband appeared. From the outside, everything was exactly what a honeymoon should be. Anaya's happiness was clear to everyone who saw her. She wore her wedding bangles proudly, admired the resort's beauty, and spoke with joy about the future she imagined. Yet beneath the surface of this picture-perfect beginning, something invisible was stirring. Rohan carried with him a weight he never revealed to anyone. To the world, they were the perfect couple starting their life together, but behind the closed doors of their villa, shadows of doubt and cracks in the facade were quietly forming. Anaya did not notice the subtle distance in his eyes, or if she did, she dismissed it as nerves from the overwhelming changes of marriage. For her, it was easier to believe that everything was perfect than to suspect that the very man she trusted most might not be what he seemed. Rohan had always carried an air of confidence in public, but those who knew him closely sensed a change in his behavior long before the wedding. He was often restless, caught between bursts of forced charm and stretches of uneasy silence. Friends noticed he avoided conversations about the future and dodged questions about settling down with Anaya. Some suspected he had other motives behind marrying her, whispering about money, status, and pressure from society, while the world celebrated the wedding as a story of love. In private, Rohan's doubts and frustrations slowly took root. As the honeymoon unfolded, those hidden feelings began to reveal themselves. At first it was in small, almost unnoticeable ways. He grew distant at dinner, staring off into the distance while Anaya spoke with excitement about the places they could visit together. His laughter, once natural, began to sound forced. When she reached out to hold his hand, he sometimes hesitated before giving in, as though the simple act carried a weight he did not want to bear. For Anaya, it was confusing, but she brushed it aside, convincing herself that it was only the stress of marriage or travel. The resort staff, however, saw glimpses of tension. A housekeeper recalled hearing raised voices one evening, muffled through the walls of the villa. Another worker noticed that Rohan often left Anaya alone, wandering the grounds by himself or sitting quietly at the bar. While Anaya tried to make the trip memorable, capturing photos by the sea and writing little notes to her new husband, Rohan seemed increasingly detached. His frustrations began to seep through in arguments, his words sharp and his tone cold. It was as if the man who had smiled so proudly at the wedding had already begun to vanish. Beneath his behavior was a storm of emotions he never admitted aloud. Rohan was torn between the image he wanted to project to the world and the reality he lived inside his mind. The expectations of being admired as a loving husband clashed with his growing resentment. Some believed he feared the judgment of society, unable to withstand the whispers and questions about marrying a transgender woman. Others thought his motivations were far darker, tied to greed and the pursuit of wealth. The truth, whatever it was, remained hidden, but it fueled a fire within him that no amount of luxury or beauty could calm. Anaya, unaware of the depth of his inner turmoil, continued to hope for better days. She bought small souvenirs at the local market, choosing items she thought would remind them of their time together. She spoke with enthusiasm about building a home, about the family gatherings they would host, and the adventures they would share. Every word was filled with hope, and every action was a gesture of love. To her, these moments were precious, fragile pieces of a dream she never wanted to lose. Yet for Rohan, each conversation only seemed to tighten the walls around him. As the days passed, the villa that was meant to be their paradise began to feel like a cage. The silence between them grew heavier, and the unspoken words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Hotel staff remembered seeing Anaya sitting by the pool alone, her eyes distant, as though she was beginning to sense something was wrong but couldn't name it. Rohan's footsteps echoed late at night when he wandered outside, pacing the walkways under the dim glow of lanterns. He was a man at war with himself, torn between appearances and intentions, and Anaya had no idea that the shadows around her were closing in. The seventh night of the honeymoon arrived with an unsettling calm. The resort was quieter than usual, as many guests had retired early, leaving the pathways and gardens nearly deserted. The waves rolled steadily against the shore, their rhythm steady and unbroken, while the moon hung low, casting silver light across the villa's balcony. To anyone outside, the night appeared peaceful, even beautiful. Inside, however, it was the backdrop for a tragedy waiting to unfold. Anaya had spent much of the day in high spirits. She had chosen a bright dress, taken photographs by the beach, and even called a friend back home to share how wonderful the trip had been. Her words carried excitement, yet there was a slight hesitation in her tone, a small crack in the mask of joy. Perhaps she had sensed the growing distance from Rohan. Perhaps she noticed the coldness that had settled in his eyes, but she did not allow herself to dwell on it. She held on to hope, believing love could overcome whatever shadows threatened them. That evening, their villa was filled with a silence that felt heavier than before. Rohan appeared withdrawn, avoiding her gaze and moving around the room with a mechanical slowness. Anaya tried to lighten the mood, suggesting they go for a walk along the shore, but he refused. She then proposed dinner on the balcony, imagining the ocean breeze might soothe his unease, yet he dismissed the idea. Instead, he sat still, staring at nothing, as though trapped in his own thoughts. To Anaya, it was frustrating but not alarming. She believed time would heal his moods. What she did not know was that his silence concealed a decision already made. As the hours passed, the atmosphere inside the villa became suffocating. The air felt charged, and the shadows seemed to grow longer with every passing minute. At some point during the night, what had been a fragile calm erupted into chaos. The details of what happened within those walls were pieced together later by investigators, but what is certain is that the struggle was brief and violent. The sound of breaking glass startled nearby guests, though no one realized its significance until morning. A fight for life had taken place in a room that had, only days earlier, been filled with promises of forever. By dawn, the horror was discovered. A housekeeper entered the suite to find the room in disarray. Clothes lay scattered across the floor, furniture was out of place, and the air carried a stillness that felt unnatural. Anaya was found lifeless, her wedding bangles shattered near her, symbols of a union that had lasted only a week. The once beautiful villa now resembled a crime scene, marked not by love but by violence. The news spread quickly through the resort. Guests whispered in shock, unable to reconcile the radiant bride they had seen days earlier with the tragedy that now unfolded. Staff members exchanged uneasy glances, recalling the arguments and the silence they had witnessed in passing. Some wept openly, moved not only by the loss of life, but by the cruel irony of a honeymoon turning into a scene of death. The dreamlike atmosphere of the coastal resort was shattered, replaced by fear and sorrow. Rohan was present when staff and officials arrived, his expression unreadable. To some, he appeared devastated, holding his head in his hands, mumbling explanations no one fully understood. To others, his behavior seemed rehearsed, as though he was trying to control the narrative before questions could be asked. His claims of sudden illness or collapse did not align with what the room revealed. The broken bangles, the marks left behind, and the overturned furniture told a story of struggle, not chance. In a matter of hours, what began as a fairy tale wedding had transformed into a chilling nightmare. The honeymoon, meant to mark the happiest days of Anaya's life, had become the stage for her final moments. The resort, once filled with laughter and love, stood silent under the weight of the tragedy, as the truth of what had taken place slowly began to unravel. Investigators arrived at the resort with urgency, their presence breaking the fragile calm that hung in the air after Anaya's body was discovered. The villa was immediately sealed off, and officers moved carefully through the scene, documenting every detail. The broken glass on the floor, the scattered belongings, and the faint marks on Anaya's arms told a story far different from the one Rohan tried to explain. He sat nearby, pale and visibly shaken, repeating that she had simply collapsed without warning. To those who listened, his words sounded hollow against the evidence laid out before them. The autopsy report soon dismantled Rohan's claims. Medical examiners found clear signs of physical struggle. Bruises marked Anaya's wrists and shoulders, and her injuries suggested force had been used. There was no indication of a natural medical condition that could explain her sudden death. What the doctors uncovered painted a picture of violence, and it was enough to raise serious doubts about the grieving husband's innocence. As detectives dug deeper, financial motives began to surface. Rohan had quietly taken out a significant insurance policy in Anaya's name just weeks before the wedding. The timing was suspicious, especially since he had no stable source of income. His bank records revealed mounting debts, and investigators began to piece together the possibility that greed had been his driving force. To them, it appeared less like an act of sudden rage and more like a cold, calculated plan. The idea that he could secure a fortune while maintaining the image of a grieving spouse was chilling. But it aligned with the evidence uncovered. Witness accounts added further weight to the investigation. Resort employees stepped forward with memories of heated arguments between the couple, though none had imagined the tension would escalate to murder. One bartender recalled seeing Rohan drinking alone late into the night, his face stern and distant, as though weighed down by something dark. Another guest mentioned hearing the sound of shouting, followed by silence, though they had dismissed it as a private matter. Every testimony chipped away at the facade Rohan had tried to build. Anaya's family, devastated by the news, pressed authorities to ensure justice. To them, the tragedy was not just a personal loss but a reflection of the dangers faced by transgender individuals who dared to live openly. They described Anaya as someone who had overcome immense hardships, only to be betrayed by the very man who had promised to protect her. The image of her broken bangles, scattered across the villa floor, became a haunting symbol of betrayal. Rohan's demeanor shifted as the evidence mounted against him. His initial calm gave way to defensiveness, then to silence. Detectives noted how he avoided direct questions and often contradicted himself. When pressed for details about the night of Anaya's death, his attempts to maintain the role of the grieving husband were no longer convincing. The once celebrated groom now appeared as the prime suspect in a crime that shocked everyone who had witnessed their wedding only a week before. The investigation revealed a deeper tragedy beyond the violence itself. Anaya's life had been filled with struggle, yet she had managed to carve out joy, acceptance, and dignity. Her story, which had begun as a symbol of love and resilience, now stood as a reminder of the dangers of misplaced trust. The irony was unbearable. She had dreamed of building a future with the man she believed would stand beside her through every storm, but that man had turned into the storm itself. By the time investigators concluded their initial findings, the case had shifted from suspicion to certainty. The physical evidence, financial records, and testimonies formed a chain too strong to deny. What had first been presented as a tragic accident was now recognized as a deliberate act. The question was no longer whether Rohan was guilty, but how long he had planned the betrayal and what justice would mean for Anaya's memory. The courtroom was crowded when the trial finally began, every seat filled with people who wanted to see how the shocking case would unfold. Journalists lined the aisles, their cameras flashing as Rohan was led in, dressed in a plain shirt, his once confident posture replaced by unease. Across the room sat Anaya's family, their faces etched with grief, but determined to see justice served. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as though everyone present understood that this was more than just another trial. It was a test of truth, of morality, and of whether the justice system could give a voice to someone silenced too soon. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They displayed photographs of the crime scene, the scattered belongings, and the shattered bangles that had once symbolized new beginnings. The autopsy report was read aloud, detailing the bruises, the signs of struggle, and the certainty that Anaya had not died naturally. Every piece of evidence pointed to violence, and every detail contradicted the narrative Rohan had clung to. The financial records were next, exposing the recently purchased insurance policy and the large debts he had carried into the marriage. It was a damning portrait, one that painted Rohan as a man who valued money over love, greed over loyalty. Witnesses came forward one by one. The housekeeper who found Anaya described the set of the room, her voice shaking as she recalled the eerie stillness. Resort staff testified about the late-night arguments and Rohan's erratic behavior during the honeymoon. A bartender repeated the memory of Rohan drinking alone, his face blank, his answers curt. Each account added another layer to the prosecution's case, until the story of a planned betrayal seemed undeniable. Rohan's defense tried to salvage his image. They argued that he was under immense pressure, that his debts and personal struggles had driven him to desperation. They claimed he had acted in a moment of emotional breakdown rather than calculation. But the weight of the evidence crushed these attempts. The timeline, the policy, and the physical marks on Anaya's body left little room for sympathy. What was meant to sound like a defense only deepened the image of a man who had betrayed the vows he made so easily. Outside the courtroom, activists gathered in large numbers, They carried placards bearing Anaya's name and spoke about the violence and prejudice faced by transgender individuals. Her story had become more than a personal tragedy, it had become a rallying cry. News outlets across the country covered the trial extensively, framing it not only as a murder case but as a moment that exposed the dangers lurking behind societal silence. Anaya's life, though short, became a symbol of resilience and a reminder of the cost of hatred and greed. When the verdict was finally delivered, the room fell into silence. The judge spoke of betrayal, greed, and the deliberate choice to take a life for personal gain. Rohan was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of release for decades. Gasps filled the courtroom, followed by tears from Anaya's family. For them, it was not victory, but it was justice. They knew no punishment could bring her back, but the truth had been acknowledged, and her name had been cleared of the lies told in her final moments. The impact of the case did not end with the sentencing. Documentaries, articles, and campaigns emerged in Anaya's memory, using her story to highlight the need for protection, respect, and acceptance for transgender people. Her name became a symbol of both love and betrayal, of hope and tragedy. She was remembered not only as a victim, but as a woman who had lived with pride despite the obstacles placed in her path. Even years later, the haunting image of her broken bangles on the villa floor remained a reminder of the fragility of trust. The wedding that had once been celebrated as a triumph of love became a cautionary tale, etched into the collective memory of those who heard it. Anaya's dream had been cut short, but her story continued to echo, urging the world to confront the darkness that hides behind smiles and promises. It stood as proof that even in moments of joy, danger can linger unseen, waiting to strike when least expected.